Hello, I'm Donald Leggett, and welcome to the latest London South East CEO interview. I'm joined today by Paul Griffiths, who is the CEO of Predator Oil and Gas. As you know, they're the main market-listed company with operations in Morocco, Trinidad, and Ireland. And Paul's going to give us an update on all these three areas. Welcome, Paul. It's clearly been a very busy time for you. I've seen a large number of RNSs coming out lately.
That's true. Many of them, of course, are regulatory administrative matters, but also some good stuff on, operations update on the three projects that we're involved in.
Let me start by asking you to put your assets in context for us. Tell us how Morocco, Trinidad, and Ireland each fit into your carbon strategy, low carbon, whatever it is. You tell me.
Well, I think when we started the company in 2017 and IPO'd in 18, we wanted to be a little bit different. We all recognized at that time that our industry was evolving, or should be evolving, into becoming more responsible in terms of CO2 emissions. So the best way we could do that was work in three areas which we knew quite well: Trinidad, Morocco, and Ireland, all of which have CO2 emissions problems for various different aspects of that. So, being able to contribute to substituting for high carbon intensive fuels, and also putting some CO2 in the ground, taking it out of the atmosphere, which is where it's going in Trinidad at present, seemed to us to be beneficial. It seemed to us to be in line with expectations of our industry going forward, and also it was commercial. There were commercial opportunities to do this, which meant returns for shareholders eventually.
Okay, you've taken us to southwest Trinidad, the peninsula there. Columbus have just agreed to merge with Bahamas Petroleum. So does that mean you're no longer negotiating with Leo and his team, and you're now negotiating with Simon Potter and his team at Bahamas?
I don't know Simon, and haven't been introduced yet. But the issue is they have to complete their scheme of arrangement in the courts next week. So it's limited on how much negotiation can be done. I'm very happy to get an introduction after that process is completed. I think it's the 5th of August, and we have three different kind of proposals and options on ways forward for Bahamas. And we would assume that we would be negotiating with Simon's team, which may or may not include parts of the Columbus team. But we're not privy to that at present. And obviously, we'd like to stay out of those sort of discussions until they have all the approvals in place.
Indeed, but they're almost there. They've got the shareholder approval, which is the big thing.
I think we've made it very clear, to the market that, our preference is to be a CO2 EOR services provider, not to take on liabilities on licenses and be seen to be actively producing conventional oil as well. I mean, maybe we haven't stressed that enough in the market, but we see our role as a CO2 EOR services provider, making profits, obviously, for our shareholders, putting CO2 into the ground, but not muddling the waters with conventional oil production.
But if you buy FRAM, doesn't that turn you into a conventional oil producer?
Not necessarily without giving anything away. It depends on the terms, how it's structured, and how we negotiate that, and what the ultimate outcome will be. I think the key thing is that we're not going to be buying FRAM at $4.2 million. That is just ain't going to happen. So that's the starting point, and the way we have to work around that is what can we offer and what they can offer to get a meeting of minds that is good for them and their shareholders, and also good for us and our shareholders.
So where are you with the CO2 pilot project? What exactly is CO2 sequestration for people like me who haven't a clue? And how exactly is it good for the environment? Tell us all.
Sequestration is quite an unusual word to use because it applies seizing assets, illegal sequestration. But sequestration means actually taking CO2 effectively out of the atmosphere if it's being vented into the atmosphere by an ammonia plant in Trinidad, for example, transporting it to a site where you can then inject it under pressure in the ground and get the ground or the subsurface to retain it without leaking. And that's what sequestration in our context means. It's taking it out of the atmosphere and putting it in the ground safely in a situation where it can't leak. So that's part of the, a significant part of the business.
And why do you put the CO2 into the ground? What benefits does it have?
By putting the CO2 into the ground, into the oil, it reduces the viscosity of the oil. It makes it more mobile. So in these very old fields in Trinidad where the oil is very heavy, it allows the oil to move to the surface more easily and at higher rates than all the current production in the wells. So that means you get a higher rate of production per well. And obviously that's beneficial from the point of view of the project economics. More production means more income for less operating cost and less capital outlay. So that's how it benefits us, but it also allows us to fund putting CO2 into the ground, because we can't do that ourselves without making some kind of revenue out of the project.
So this is early doors. Have you actually got any oil out of the ground? What exactly are you in terms of testing and so on?
We are 85X. We're going to do a production rate test on that next month. We've got that all set up to do. We just have to have approval for the dedicated production facilities, because we need to, they're all installed, but we need to keep those separate from the conventional existing facilities in case there's any CO2 contamination into those facilities. So it sits as a single ring-fenced project, and that's how it should be.
Fantastic. Okay, let me take you to Morocco. We're going around the world in 80 days here. Let me take you to Morocco.
Yeah.
Has the COVID lockdown been lifted in Morocco?
No, right now there's another review on the 10th of August. They had a limited lifting of travel restrictions, but only for Moroccan citizens. And of course, that didn't work very well, because the cost of getting back to Morocco was exorbitant for these citizens. So we will know a better idea on the 10th of August. Where we are in our planning for the well is we're assuming that by October, restrictions will be lifted sufficiently to move people across borders without substantial long quarantine periods. And the reason why that is important is it's an international operation. You have Canadian rig crew, you have maybe Algerian well service providers, and they've got to be able to move between countries in order to get everybody together. You can't do this sort of thing remotely by laptop or by computer.
You've got Conoco Phillips as a neighbour. Now, how thrilled were you that Conoco Phillips have arrived?
I freely admit it was a surprise, not only to us, but to STX and everybody else, all the other operators in Morocco.
Yeah, and Sound.
And Sound, yeah, because none of us could understand the ONHYM website. And it was only I was looking something up on the website, a license map, and I suddenly realised there was a banner headline that said they signed an agreement with Conoco Phillips in June. I thought, well, that's great. Nobody knew about that. So I alerted everybody to it. And I think it's obviously fantastic news, right? Because for a super major like that to come into a country onshore, right next to us, next door neighbours, it's fantastic news. It couldn't be more positive. I would say, though, that people shouldn't just assume Conoco Phillips will rush and do a deal with us or whatever. All big companies require that you have credibility before they'll look at deals. And part of our job is to establish that credibility by drilling a well. If we de-risk Guercif, of course they'll be at the door, to look at what we've got. But nobody's going to come in pre-drill to look at what we've got. I don't believe, of course we'll try, until you've actually de-risked it for them. That's how big companies work. But it's fantastic to have someone like that on your doorstep.
Okay, let's talk through MOU 1. Could you talk us through the new target found there, and beyond that, your LNG strategy for Morocco?
Yeah, when we originally took the Guercif license, it was on a specific prospect, which was subject to the CPR, etc., and that was fine. And there was an area that we'd neglected, which was called volcanics, which is like a volcano, if you like. The rocks in the well, Geoffrey-1 well, that are supposedly not reservoir. So when we had Newtec, which is a Houston technology company looking at wireline logs, I used them to do de-risk Tendrara when I had Tendrara at Fastnet, and they did a fantastic job on that. So I used them to look at it, and they identified some gas pay in GRF1 in what was supposedly volcanics, and it had permeability, it had porosity, it had all the good things that you'd expect in a reservoir. So that made us re-look at the area, this very large area to the northeast of the world that had been called volcanics and just dismissed. And when we mapped it out and went, and not ourselves, but we outsourced it to an independent company to map it so that it doesn't look as though we just created a prospect for the sake of it. It actually fitted a very good geological model. So it was driven by the fact that what we previously thought was volcanics, well, it's a reservoir, it's a potential reservoir, and that opened up a huge area to the northeast. So it could contain a lot of gas, there's no doubt about it, but it needs de-risking, and our well will help de-risk it, and then maybe some seismic, and another well will help de-risk it. But the bottom line is there's not many areas onshore Morocco where you have a simple reservoir 2 kilometers from a pipeline, the Maghreb pipeline to Europe, where favorable fiscal regime, if you make a significant discovery, then it's gas to power in Morocco, job done.
Okay, big question. If you do find material gas, would you want to develop it yourself, or would you pass it on to somebody else?
I think that the fundamental lesson I've learned in 40 years is that don't fall in love with your project. If you found substantial gas and you're going to get a reasonable price, a good price for that gas because you've taken the risk, the best time to sell a project, as Cove Energy found out in East Africa, is before it gets developed. Because the minute it gets go down the development option, then you're going to have to bring in a partner because you'll never fund it yourself as a small company. You're going to have a partner that sees you as a weak link because they've got the money, So what you do is you set it out before plan of development. And I did that with Amstelfield in the Netherlands. We sold that out eventually went to Gas to France, but we put the plan of development together and then sold out. It came on stream at 15,000 barrels a day, but who cares, because we got a good return for our investment in it. We got something like 20 times what we invested in it. And you always have to leave something on the table. To get a deal done, you must leave something on the table. You can't be greedy.
And definitely not. And in Ireland, let's talk Ireland. You have plans to import LNG, liquid natural gas, into the Irish market with a floating storage and regasification unit, an FSRU. So where are you with all that? That sounds fantastically exciting.
We started that process late last year, and we had an LNG supplier who I knew from the past who were interested in the Irish market. But we all know that the Irish market is very difficult because of the political situation, etc. So we decided to take a chance that what will be in terms of politics. We can't influence that. But what is inescapable is that Ireland needs security of supply, energy supply. And under EU standards, they need to have storage, they need to have a diversity of energy supply, and that includes LNG. So building an LNG plant onshore is not an option. One, because most of the options that have been discussed to date use shale gas, and that's a no-no in Ireland. And secondly, it's very intrusive environmentally. So we looked at, through a connection we had, long-standing connection, we looked at what is a floating regas. It gasifies LNG offshore, and then you've got a pipeline, which is the Kinsale pipeline. The Kinsale field has been abandoned, but you've got a pipeline with no use for it. So you put it direct into the pipeline. We managed to sign up an NDA with this supplier of a regasification vessel, who we know very well. They will fund, as part of the deal, the offshore part of the capex, which is the major part of the deal. We got the LNG supplier signed up in the NDA. So we then thought, well, this is going to be a battle with the Irish regulatory authorities. So we went to the Commission to Regulation of Utilities, which is one of the highest regulatory authorities in Ireland, and they will be the ones who issue an LNG import license. Within a few days, we got a response, and we're talking about project schedule. We went to Gas Networks Ireland, who are owner of the infrastructure, and said, what do you think if we want to put 300 million cubic feet of gas into your infrastructure? Oh, we can't do it. I can't do it. We'll do an engineering design to see what we have to do to accommodate it. We went to 2 gas purchasers, gas buyers in Ireland, asked them to sign NDAs on the basis that they might get gas in Q3 2023. Both signed up. So we know in the space of 6 months, we got traction on this project. We did not advertise it anywhere. We put out an RNS. It was picked up in the Irish newspapers. It was picked up by LNG Europe, which I don't know LNG Europe. It was picked up by Platts. So we know that this project is the right time, right place. We're taking, if you like, a regulatory risk because we're going against the tide in terms of how Ireland sees fossil fuel and all this. But we believe that pragmatism will come about next year, and the security of supply issue with the EU will become dominant, and an LNG import is inevitable at some point. To keep it offshore is the most attractive option. To keep the Kinsale pipeline working away is attractive as well, because in 10 years' time they want to sequestrate CO2 using that pipeline in the old Kinsale gas field. Well, great. We keep it warm for 10 years. Fantastic, So
how would you fund that, Paul?
We don't have to fund anything. The beauty about this deal is that everybody else funds it. We're doing the work, and you may think this is how on earth do you create a business? It's management time. It's only management time. There's no capex involved. We fund everything we're doing at present in terms of our management time, right? Which is, it's not a capital outlay. It's using my network in Ireland over 40 years. It's using a credible plan. The parties coming to the table are being offered capacity in an LNG facility. You pay for that capacity. You don't, so we'll be looking for an upfront payment from a couple of them in order to do, like, for example, the environmental work. We're not going to be, doing the EIAs, etc., funding that ourselves. We'll be running that process, but we want someone else to fund it. So the regulatory process will take probably up to 18 months with a fair wind. It may take longer. There are a number of elements to it, but we're clear that this process fits into what may fit into some of their planning for their infrastructure bill, because this will be seen as a strategic asset, so that it will allow it to. Nothing in Ireland will ever be fast tracked, but it will allow it to run through a serious process that has definitive timelines, because it's in their interest. With Corrib running down, we've got production of Corrib running down. The only place they get gas from is the UK. Well, if you want to be reliant on UK after Brexit, well, good luck, guys, because anything can happen in the context of that, because the UK will no longer be part of the European tariff code. So unless they come to some kind of agreement by 1st of January next year. So I think that's what gives this a lot of traction, is because there's a realization that there's a problem coming down the road, which is not simple and was not foreseen 5 years ago. And that is, you don't want to be relying on interconnected gas from the UK as your only source of gas.
Okay, Paul. I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed to Paul Griffiths, CEO of Predator Oil and Gas, for joining us. I learned a lot today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
For more, thank you. And for more interviews like this one, please subscribe to the London South East YouTube channel. My final thought, thank you very much for watching, and do stay safe.